Coefficient of variation. Coefficient variation looks at the risk of the investment relative to its return. Now, for the measure of risk, we use its standard deviation. Let's have a look at an illustration. Suppose that we're looking at two stocks, stock K and L, and their standard deviations are as follows. Stock K has a standard deviation of 12 and stock L has a standard deviation of 16. Now, if we stop the analysis right here, the conclusion, of course, would be that stock L is riskier. However, the flaw with that approach is that you're only looking at risk in isolation. We should also be looking at the returns that the investment is expected to yield. So yes, it's true, stock L is riskier on a standalone basis, but how much compensation are we getting for it? And that's where coefficient variation comes in. So by looking at the return as well, coefficient of variation finds the ratio of the two. So risk, in this case 12 divided by 4 is equal to 3 times, and for stock L, 16 divided by 8 is equal to 2 times. And there it is. In absolute terms, stock K has lower volatility, but on relative terms and relative to return, stock K has more risk per unit of return. And you can see that right here by looking at our coefficient of variation framework, which is risk over return. All I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten out this ratio, which is one of my favorite analytical approaches when it comes to ratio. I just flatten it out, and here's what I mean by flatten it out. And all I have to do is multiply both sides by the average, and that's when I get the coefficient of variation times the average. And then by plugging in the coefficient of variation for both stock K and L, you can see how straightforward it becomes to interpret it. So for every 1% return with stock K, risk would increase 3 times. On the other hand, for stock L, for every 1% increase in return, risk only increases 2%. So this is what we mean. So on a relative basis, stock L actually seems less risky because for the same 1% increase in return with stock L, risk increases by less.